Welcome to Bills by the Numbers, presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Coming up, it hasn't been their method, but is it time for the Bills to spend big on a premier player in free agency? Should pass rusher be the free agent priority? And ESPN's Mike Clay joins us to share the analytics on the better edge players available on the market and free agency at large. It's the offseason, people! All right, glad you can make it for the latest Bills by the Numbers. Bills Wall of Famer Steve Tasker, Bills insider Chris Brown with you. And our jumping off point deals with Buffalo's offseason priorities. All along, Steve, we've heard about the process, which as far as roster building goes, has been rooted in drafting, developing, and re-signing their own. That's the core principle. The roster is now one of the deeper ones in the NFL, and they've made free agent additions through the course of the first 5 years of the McDermott Bean regime. But now that the team is viewed as a perennial contender, is it time to shift that process and spend big on a player in free agency?
I would say no. Don't change what you've been doing. They have been a Super Bowl caliber team for the last 24 months. Even in the loss in the Kansas City championship game 2 years ago, and then going into the divisional round this year, I think they are right where they want to be. They're going to have a chance at it every year, and to upset the apple cart, there's no reason to do something different. This is what got them out of a 17-year playoff drought. This is what got them to be a team that is one of those teams that you write an L on if you're one of those teams going down win-loss at the beginning of the season. You're thinking, I don't know if we can beat that team. Time after time, this team has shown the ability to beat anybody on their schedule, the way they're playing it now and the way they're doing, even with the flaws that they have. And don't forget, you're not going to have a perfect football team. And whatever flaws you have, other teams are going to mirror those or be worse off. So, no, you don't have to go out and do anything other than what you've been doing and using the philosophy you've got that's gotten you to this point.
There is a common temptation when you are deemed to be as close to winning the whole kit and caboodle as the Bills are to spend big on that proverbial player that may get you over the hump. Just give me this one guy, and we're going to do it. And when you see other teams do that, L.A. Rams, for example.
Well, think about this. Think about the New York Jets. They get Carlos Dunlap. They never see him play it down.
That's right.
You got all those eggs in that one basket. If something happens, you're done.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why many feel Brandon Beane and company should resist that temptation to a degree and keep on keeping on with the approach that they've taken, which for the most part has been second-tier free agents where they don't fall victim to overpaying for anybody, and then if it doesn't work out, they're left holding the bag. The Arizona Cardinals would be an example of this. Buffalo put a set value on J.J. Watt last offseason. They were interested, but they put a set value on him, and when the value surged beyond that because other teams were interested, they said, yeah, we're gonna remove ourselves from the bidding war here because we're not going to get involved in that. Arizona paid 2 years, $31.5 million for J.J. Watt, who played all of 6 games in the regular season due to shoulder injuries and really wasn't or didn't provide the impact that they had hoped. And, they crawl into the playoffs and they're bounced in the first round. So there is evidence to argue against going for the big fish in free agency. Most of Buffalo's free agent signings, as we've mentioned during the Beane-McDermott era, have been sensible. Tier 2 market signings, right, with the exception of maybe Mitch Morse, who they paid top of the market money for at his position back in 2019, and maybe the Star Lotulelei contract, which was 5 years and $50 million. Beyond that, it's been more fiscally responsible signings. John Brown, Cole Beasley, Mario Addison, A.J. Klein, Emmanuel Sanders, etc. As far as spending on their defensive line, though, Steve, I thought it was necessary to kind of go inside these numbers a little bit. 2018, they signed free agent Trent Murphy, 3 years, $22.5 million, $5.25 million signing bonus. As we mentioned, Lotulelei, 5 years, $50 million that same offseason. 2019, 2-year extension for Jerry Hughes, 2 years, $21.5 million, and they drafted Ed Oliver 9th overall. 2020, they signed Mario Addison as a free agent, 3 years, $30 million. They also draft A.J. Epinesa as their top pick in round 2. And then last year, as we know, they doubled down with Greg Rousseau and Boogie Basham with their first 2 picks. So each of the last 3 years, Buffalo has used free agency money, draft capital on their defensive line, not necessarily last year in 2021, but a lot of these aforementioned contracts are up now. Hughes and Addison on expiring deals, as we know. Latulele, one could argue, is not contributing at a level commensurate with his salary, and he's already taken pay cuts in the past. Could he be a cap casualty? Perhaps. And then you have Harrison Phillips, an ascending player who is an unrestricted free agent. So all of that being said, in what ways do you see the Bills addressing their defensive line this offseason?
Well, they certainly have to spend a lot of attention on it, and therefore maybe some capital, no question. We may be looking at another high draft pick on the defensive line. I don't think there's anything wrong with it if the guy is available. They think he can be a difference maker. You forget also Vernon Butler was part of that free agent
also
class with Mario Addison, and they have not gotten a guy who is dominant yet. There's nothing that says A.J. Epinesa or Greg Rousseau or Boogie Basham couldn't emerge into that. Ed Oliver certainly had his best year as a pro this past season, no question about it. But Ed Oliver also, there's some things that have to be in place, for most people's opinion, for him to be dominant. And that means a big-time nose tackle, a one technique right next to him. If the Bills can find that guy in the draft or sign one off the free agent market, Ed Oliver stays at the top of his game. But I don't think there's any question they're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of attention and maybe some money on the defensive line again this offseason because you've got those expiring contracts that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Certainly those guys that you mentioned, Jerry Hughes, Addison, they're about where they were when the Bills signed them to those deals in the first place. They have not mushroomed, they haven't gotten better. They haven't emerged as dominant players. Certainly Jerry Hughes is a very respected pass rusher in the league. But his sack numbers are pedestrian. They're average.
Same for Addison.
Same thing with Addison. Now, if you look at the analytics people, they'll tell you the Bills' pass rush is a little better than what people give it credit for. Their sacks don't reflect that, although they're not an embarrassingly low sack total. The Bills don't have a pass rush that teams are afraid of. They think they can get some things done against them. Now, certainly they may give up a sack or two here against the Bills, but it's mostly, and two, let's not forget this, their secondary has been stellar. And that has helped. The quarterbacks have to hold on to the ball an extra half beat. So, yeah, I think the Bills are going to continue to pound on that defensive line until they get it to where they want it. And I don't think they got there this last year.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, they did finish strong. They had 19 sacks in their last 5 games, counting the first round of the playoffs. And then I think that went up to 22. In their last 6, which was among the league leaders. While that was certainly encouraging, I tend to agree with you, Steve. I don't think anyone fears Buffalo's pass rush to the point where they say, we got a game plan for that guy. There isn't any one of those kinds of guys on the roster, maybe with the exception of Oliver. Now, could Greg Rousseau or Boogie Basham develop into somebody like that, A.J. Epinesa? I suppose that's possible. I'm not banking on that, though, if I'm a team that's a perennial contender looking to improve upon that area of my game. I need a free agent acquisition, a proven player with proven production, and I need to add that to this roster because you have a tremendous amount of youth there. Give me a proven veteran player. Maybe I'm not paying top of the market. I'm not paying $14.5 million a year for a Chandler Jones. I can't do that. But maybe I'm paying $10 million a year for somebody I like.
If you could
that's
get,
maybe a little older, but not past
it.
his prime. I mean, that's what they did with Mario Addison. That's what they did when they re-signed Jerry Hughes.
I'll give you an example.
They got mixed results.
I'll give you an example. Von Miller's finishing up a contract with the L.A. Rams. You get him on a 1-year deal to come in, finish out his career, maybe try and go for a Super Bowl ring with a third team.
Yeah.
You could maybe entice him to come here on a short deal, or it'd be a good 1-year deal, but it would be a very short-term deal. Or maybe you get him on a bargain deal. Maybe he wants to give it a couple of years.
Well, yeah.
But that's what you're talking about. You're not going to talk about giving Von Miller $15 million a year on a 4-year deal at this point of his career.
No.
But those are the kind of guys that are going to be out there. And only get a guy like with his credentials and his resume if it's a bargain on your end.
Yeah, and his market value at age 32 is somewhere in the neighborhood of $10.5 million a year, which, may still sound like a fat number to some people, but on the defensive end market, it is not.
But if you could give him a 1-year deal that's okay and let him prove it again and give him a chance at another ring, you might be able to entice him. But that's what it's a special scenario. You're not just going to sign him to a long-term deal with a lot of guaranteed money. And
I wonder, because when Brandon Beane spends big, it's rarely on a 1-year contract.
Right.
He'll use 1-year contracts for the Tier 2 free agents and even lower than that, bottom bargain basement free agents. He'll use the 1-year deals for those types of players.
And it lights a fire under him, yeah.
When he spends big, Mario Addison, 3 years, $30 million. Even the Jerry Hughes extension, 2 years, $21.5 million. He rarely goes 1 year with those types of investments because I don't think he likes the fact that there might be limited cap flexibility there. He doesn't like putting all his eggs in a 1-year basket. So I wonder if he goes to Von Miller and says 2 years, or if he goes to, Jason Pierre-Paul and says 2 years. He rarely uses a 1-year contract on a bigger name free agent with proven production.
What those 1-year contracts do is, like, for instance, if you get a guy like a Cole Beasley who can come in, and I don't know what his numbers were, but say he was somewhere in the market was like 5.5 for a 4-year deal per year when the Bills signed him 3 years ago. But the Bills wanted him on a short term. They would give him, if they were going to give him 5.5, or if his market value was $4.5 million in there, the Bills would say, all right, we'll give you 6 on a 1-year deal, and you can prove it, and then you're going to be right back out there in a fresh market with an even bigger number for a 4-year deal for somebody else. That's the mentality that he uses.
Right.
So you get a player that's playing on a 1-year deal for a really good buck and is motivated to really get it done so he can kick the can again.
Right.
So that's the logic behind it.
Or you could do an incentive-laden 2-year contract where
correct.
In the first year you get this, and if you produce, it kicks in more money for year 2. It'll trigger escalators and whatever else.
Right.
That's another way.
If you get a Pro Bowl, if you get certain statistical thresholds, you get a bump.
In year 2, right. And that money is locked in or something to that effect. There's many ways you can skin the cat in that fashion. The other defensive line investment I think we're all anticipating is on the defensive interior. And I would tend to think, Steve, that if you're investing significant free agent dollars on the free agent market at defensive end because you need a proven veteran to pair with all the youth you have at that position, you're probably looking to the draft for defensive interior. And there are some enticing, defensive tackles on the first 2 days of the draft in what is considered one of the deeper draft classes overall because of all the kids that went back to school another year, getting another year of eligibility due to the COVID pandemic. So there's going to be a flood of additional talent in this year's draft. I would tend to think if you're spending big in free agency, as we anticipate at the defensive end position, proven player, you probably go to the draft to address your defensive interior. And, of course, this is all under the assumption that they get Harrison Phillips back in the fold.
Right. No question, they're gonna try and fill in some gaps with free agency, and let's go back and draft 101. What teams do in free agency, they try and fill all their holes with some depth players or maybe some great players, but they try and fill all their holes so that when the draft comes, whatever position is out there with the best player who looks like he's going to have the best pro career, you can take him.
Yeah.
Whether it's a cornerback, safety, running back, whatever, it doesn't matter. So that in free agency, they're going to cast a wide net, and you can bet they're going to bring in some veteran guys who have been told and proven that they're going to come in and compete to start and be a big part of the rotation. Now, the defensive line in Buffalo always rotates, and I don't know that that's a plus or a minus for a lot of guys in free agency. Yeah. They may want to come in and say, "Listen, I want 75% of the snaps, all right? I don't want to."
Well, that's not happening here.
I don't want 35% of the snaps. I want, what I'm saying? So that may be a problem. Or the Bills might be saying, listen, the one reason we do that, a lot of the reason is because nobody's emerging.
Yeah.
If you can emerge, we'll give you more snaps. That
Which
kind of
they've
thing.
done to a certain degree.
But that's what's going to happen in free agency on the defensive line and every place else. The Bills are going to cast a wide net. You're going to see a lot of names, some of whom you'll be familiar with, vaguely familiar with, but some of them you won't know who they are. For instance, when the Bills signed Mitch Morse, people were like, who? They thought it was going to be Matt Paradis, right?
Yep.
It was Mitch Morse. And we liked it because he was younger and he had been with Pat Mahomes in his MVP years. Like, wow, yeah, we can use that guy, and he's been a very good player for him. So look for names like that, and a lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
We'll have further free agent discussions a little bit later when we catch up with ESPN's Mike Clay, who recently put out his much-anticipated free agent list, which is essentially a cheat sheet for people like Steve and me, which we appreciate. So we'll catch up with Mike in just a little bit. But right now, we want to remind you that new FanDuel customers can get their first bet risk-free up to $1,000. Just sign up today by going to sportsbook.fanduel.com or by downloading the FanDuel Sportsbook app. FanDuel Sportsbook, an official partner of the Buffalo Bills. We move on to the numbers game, and this week's edition deals with Buffalo's pass rush. And we'll again go with the true-false answer for you, Steve, because some of these stats get out in the weeds a little bit. So we go with question number 1, Steve. Buffalo finished the season with more than 40 sacks. True or false?
I'm going to say true to this because in the last 5 games, remember they had 19 in the last 4 or 5 games, and that was number 1 in the league over the last month of the season. So I'm going to think, that put them up over the 40 threshold. Now the top league team had like 57, something like that. So
yeah, Pittsburgh's been up there.
I'll say yeah.
You are correct. True. Buffalo finished the season tied for 11th in the league in sacks with 42 total. Just got up and over there at the end of the season. They can thank the Jets in a big way for that. Question number 2 here in the numbers game. Buffalo was number 1 in the league in quarterback pressure percentage.
I'm going to say number 1. No, I don't think they were number. They might have been good. I don't think they were number 1. I'm going to say false.
It's true, Steve. Really? The Bills ranked first in the NFL in quarterback pressure percentage, getting pressure almost 31% of the time. No other NFL club even reached 29%. They were at 30.8 officially on the year. And to me, Steve, while this is an advanced statistic for sure, the criteria, I don't know. I feel like the people that view that, it's somewhat subjective, isn't it? I'm not trying to knock the Bills' pressure percentage, but some of that leaves me wanting more.
Yeah, some of the statistics in the Bills' defensive year, now certainly they were number 1 in a ton of categories, and they were very productive and all of that. It just doesn't jive with the eye test. Mm-hmm. They didn't have. It seemed from a fan standpoint, it wasn't difference-making pressure.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't game-changing.
I think that's a great way to put it.
And that's why it's hard to get your mind around it, and that's why people, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth because as good as statistically their defense played and looked on paper, it didn't feel that way when you watched this team
and I don't know if bad taste in your mouth might be a little strong because for me, more than anything, it just leaves me wondering. Like, why doesn't it look that good? If it's top of the league, why doesn't it look that good to me?
Why can't we see that and feel
why isn't it readily apparent?
And that's a strange place to be for Bills fans because it puts you in a little bit of a quandary about how you feel about Leslie Frazier, how you feel about Tremaine Edmonds, how you feel about your young defensive line, how do you feel about Tre'Davious White and Levi Wallace and the safeties? Because statistically and around the league, the Bills defense has a lot of respect, but it doesn't seem like a dynamic, playmaking, dominant defense.
The numbers say I'm supposed to love the pass rush. Why don't I?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like one of those deals.
Yeah.
All right, number 3, the Bills' pass rush, speaking of it, ranked in the top 10 for quarterback knockdowns. True or false?
I'll probably say yeah to that. True.
That would be false, Steve.
Where do they fall?
Buffalo had 51 quarterback knockdowns in 2021, tied for 14th most in the league, around middle of the pack.
Yeah.
So not bad, but not great,
Yeah.
Number 4, Buffalo's defense ranked in the top 10 in missed tackles. How about this?
All right, this is something that we talked about at Lincoln where you see when the defense didn't play well, it was always because they were missing tackles and the first guy to the ball didn't get the guy on the ground. But I'm going to say true, I guess. I think
you'd be right. It is true. Buffalo was tied for 10th, right at the cusp of the top 10 in total missed tackles. They had 118 on the season in 2021. The Indianapolis game sticks out, of course. Ton of missed tackles in that game. If you asked me to pick a game where I thought they'd have the most in a single game, it would be that game. That would be the game I would pick. Number 5 in the numbers game. The Bills were a top 10 blitz percentage team. True or false?
I think that's false. I don't think they blitzed that much.
Yeah, that is correct. That is false. The Bills ranked 13th in the league in blitz percentage. They blitzed 26% of the time. Not bad, Steve. I think you got 3 out of 5 there.
Something like
Batting
that.
600 in the numbers game, so nice job there. We now welcome in ESPN.com writer and analyst Mike Clay, who just put out his highly anticipated free agent cheat sheet by position. We cover some of the more interesting names and assess cost as well as realistic return on investment. Here is Mike. All right, Mike, so your highly anticipated free agency cheat sheet is out. Steve and I were combing through it thoroughly, and we know, at least here in Buffalo, Mike, that with 8 players on Buffalo's defensive line with expiring contracts, mostly of the unrestricted variety, they have to do something there, knowing they already have a ton of youth at the defensive end position, due mainly to their last couple of drafts with A.J. Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, and Boogie Basham. But we haven't seen Brandon Beane all that often do the 1-year big money deal. He usually likes to go a couple of years at the very least. I know Mario Addison's probably the most recent example, 3 years, $30 million a couple of years ago. Who is in line for a contract that would find that acceptable, I guess? Some 2-year deal, a veteran pass rusher with proven production. Does anybody come to mind right away that's not going to completely break this bank here in Buffalo?
Ooh, you don't want to break the bank. Yeah, I mean, because there are some nice ones out there, right? I mean, I know the cap is a consideration here. You love to go in when you're on the cusp of making a title run and get a Chandler Jones type. Maybe Jadeveon Clowney. You think maybe they could steal him away from Cleveland? I mean, you might be able to get him on a 1-year deal. That's what he played on last year in Cleveland, and he had a run there where he wasn't getting many sacks, but was getting a lot of pressure, and that kind of translated to a big bounce back season last year. But Emmanuel Ogbah from Miami is a name to keep an eye on for sure. You're probably, maybe a Charles Harris type from Detroit. I think they like him a lot, so I bet they try to re-sign him. If you're pushing probably a young guy like Derek Barnett's probably too expensive. Lorenzo Carter's a guy I like. He's close by there with the New York Giants. I like him a lot. I think he's underrated and is a guy to take a look at. So, I think there's some options in that mid-range, guys that can make a little bit of an impact. Obviously, they invested a lot in the edge last offseason, so they're hoping those guys develop and they won't necessarily need to spend here. But it's a matter of what their interpretation is of the development of those guys.
What position group because it's an extensive list, is there any group that particularly grabs you? Is there going to be a lot of guys there that signed bigger deals than maybe other position groups?
Yeah, good question. I think that you can look at, I think there's some really intriguing corners at the top, right? A guy like J.C. Jackson in New England's one of the best corners in the NFL. Really like Carlton Davis. He hasn't been great in Tampa Bay when he's been asked to shadow. Like the guys up against him have generally produced pretty well, but he's a good young corner and has shined at times. Stephon Gilmore's out there right now. Kesey Hayward still has it. He's like 32 years old, still crushing it out there. Darius Williams, and the next corner opposite Jalen Ramsey, who could potentially get a big deal. So Travarius Ward, how about him in Kansas City? I know that, the Bills have seen plenty of him the past couple of years. So a couple names there, it's kind of top heavy, right? A lot of the positions have a couple guys rated at the top, including, safety. Obviously I just mentioned edge rusher. You have like a guy like Calais Campbell in the interior, same thing along the offensive line, but how about wide receiver too? And, I know that Buffalo doesn't necessarily need to go out and get a number one, right? You have Stephon Diggs. Hopefully Gabriel Davis makes that big year 3 leap for them. We saw that down the stretch this past season, and perhaps Cole Beasley's there in the slot. So I don't think they need to go that direction. But, to answer your question, there are a lot of names right there. And I'll be curious to see if their franchise tag is used or if guys are extended. Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin coming off the torn ACL, DJ Chark, if we're going to go a little lower, a guy that's coming off an injury. Juju Smith-Schuster, same thing. Allen Robinson coming off a bad season. OBJ's coming off an injury as well. How about Mike Williams, Michael Gallup? There's a lot of names on various levels there. Young guys going for that big second contract, or veterans who are kind of settled in as stars in the NFL. So I think Buffalo, though, probably aims a little bit lower on that list. A guy that's not going to be super expensive, kind of a role player, maybe a number 3 or a number 4. Obviously, they use a lot of 11 personnel.
Yeah, and I mean, I know he's strictly a slot guy, but what do you make, Mike, of like a Jamison Crowder type?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what's going to happen here with Cole Beasley entering his age 33 season, last year of a contract, and does represent a fair amount of cap savings if they decide to go in another direction there. I'm not saying they will. I don't know, but if they do, like a 28-year-old Jamison Crowder looks like somebody that could fill the role in the event that something like that happens. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I like that a lot, especially if they move on from Beasley, because like I said, they use a lot of 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, and you have Diggs and Davis kind of locked in, and Beasley's there for now. But after that, a lot of question marks, right? Is Marquez Stevenson ready to be a 3 or a 4? Probably not. So I think you do have options. If you want to spend up, you have a Christian Kirk coming out of Arizona. Jamison Crowder, obviously a reliable. He's getting a little older and he's been beat up. He's probably not going to make it through a full 17-game season, but he's a guy that could be a reliable target, much like Cole Beasley was when he is on the field. Russell Gage out of Atlanta is another option. How about Braxton Berrios? Maybe, steal him away from the New York Jets if he can. So there are options out there, guys that can play in the slot. Zach Pascal from Indianapolis. I mean, there are Cedric Wilson from Dallas. I can go on and on. Again, at various levels, there are available players. The only warning I would give, though, is that, you look at, say, over the last 5 years or so, and look at all of the big, the highly paid wide receivers that were free agents, right? Teams that decided not to tag them or extend them. They got to free agency. They signed. Almost no one panned out. It's just a position that has not worked out. And maybe it is just a situation where the team has a good evaluation of them and feels, look, they're not worth what they're asking for. We're going to let them go. And then they do not work out with their next team. So I know a lot of fans are going to want an impact player at that position. I would just be forewarned, especially as I mentioned, a lot of these guys have serious injuries they're coming off of.
So if you look at we've talked about players around the league that might get big deals. Is there any one of the maybe 17 free agents coming off of Buffalo's roster, all the way from Jerry Hughes, all the way down to Ryan Bates, Saran Neal, Justin Zimmer, those kind of guys, Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, Emmanuel Sanders, Mitch Trubisky? I'd like to kind of get your idea about where Mitch might land. But are there any other players on Buffalo's roster that may hit a home run in free agency?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Jerry Hughes is the name, right, that jumps out to me, a guy that's been such an impact player for a long time. So, hopefully he gets his, and there's always a need for edge rushers out there. So, perhaps it'll work out. You think about a guy like Melvin Ingram, who, the Chargers moved on. He dealt with some injuries. He goes to Pittsburgh. That didn't work out. You think he's sliding down to the end of his career. And then look what he did in Kansas City was terrific down the stretch. So, perhaps Hughes can find a home and have another couple of years of dominance. Obviously a big name. I'm curious about Levi Wallace because, as someone who spent a lot of time studying corners over the last decade, basically charting, every week who's Tre'Davious White shadowing this week. What does that mean for Levi Wallace? It goes on and on. Something I've always done. Sometimes you see a really good defensive scheme. You see a really good number one corner, and then the number two on the other side really benefits from that, right? And their numbers look good, and they look like they're a really good player because the competition's not as good. Then they go elsewhere and struggle. So I'm curious to see what that means for Wallace, whether he's retained or if he moves on. Maybe he gets a lot of attention because of what he did in that Bills defense, and it leads to a starting job elsewhere, and kind of how that goes. So definitely an interesting name. But, you mentioned it. Trubisky is an interesting one because I've seen it's that time of the year, right? We're on social media where, we see comments from people and their team lost their quarterback, right? Whether it's Ben Roethlisberger and another needy team, and the pool is not great, right? There's not many great standout rookie options. The veteran options, as you can see from this cheat sheet, not so hot, and people start looking at backups as, maybe this is the guy. I think he can bounce back. He just needs to change the scenery. And Trubisky's one of them guys. Yeah. Steelers fans think he could be the solution to their issues. It's unbelievable. I don't really get it. I don't think there's a lot to love at that position. Trubisky, I do have ranked third as the third best option among free agents, but we're talking Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Andy Dalton, Cam Newton, Marcus Mariota. It's just not a great situation. So I do think because there's so little in terms of availability, Trubisky may find a situation where he's competing for or is the short-term starter for a team. I'm rooting for him. I hope he bounces back, but I'll tell you what, there's just it's a seller's market essentially. There's just not enough to
Yeah.
go around at the quarterback position right now.
Right.
Last one we have for you, Mike. Last year, the Bills wanted to add a speed element to their offensive backfield. They did that in the form of Matt Breida. He fell out of favor due to ball security issues late in the season here, so it's not anticipated he's going to return. Is there another back out there that would strike you as, you know, a guy you could insert into a committee or at least behind Devin Singletary that maybe offers a speed element whose name isn't Matt Breida?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting situation because I'm a bit of a Devin Singletary, Zach Moss apologist, right? I know Moss hasn't necessarily worked out. He was phased out of the offense. I'd like to see that duo work out, but obviously they're not committed to it. Devin Singletary, I would imagine now goes in as the lead back next season. Although it seemed like they were prepared. It seemed like earlier this season, like, oh, they're both done, right? Like they're going to the offseason. They're going after a day two running back, which they still could. That might be your best path there. Or they're going to sign someone, an impact player, maybe bring in a Melvin Gordon or James Conner or something like that. But now, after what Singletary did down the stretch, you know, I think they committed to him and he looked good. And now you are looking for a compliment. So, you know, I think you have some options. You know, it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be a super standout you're going to pay a lot for if you're committed to Singletary, but a Raheem Mostert or maybe a Jerick McKinnon, maybe you go after a guy like Rashad Penny who finished the season strong, someone like that. But I don't know if that's necessarily where you want to go there. You might want to look for a guy that just complements Singletary, you know, a two-headed attack. If you don't believe in Moss, maybe it's a Sony Michel who did a pretty good job for the Rams this year, kind of a bigger back, can help between the tackles and allow Singletary to be more versatile. Still can get, you know, 11, 12 carries, but also 5 targets, maybe 6 targets, and help out in passing situations. So, yeah, Ronald Jones is another one that I think could fit that bill. So again, not necessarily speed guys, but I think good compliments to Devin Singletary. But again, I don't know what their plan is there. You know, I don't know if you guys think they will say, you know what, we're taking a day 2 running back. We're going to try to find a clear lead back here. We're done with these other guys. But it's definitely one of the more intriguing situations for this Bills roster.
Mike, thanks, man. That's a lot of good stuff. Appreciate you.
Always fun, guys. Thanks a lot.
We wrap up this edition of Bills by the Numbers with another part of the free agency equation, recruiting. As this team was developing into the perennial contender we see now, we heard veteran players on this roster talking up Buffalo as a destination if you want to win, how the coaching staff helps you be the best version of yourself as a player, etc. And we heard Stephon Diggs recently, even at the Pro Bowl this year, say he was talking up Buffalo as the place to be if you want to win. But truthfully, Steve, I would argue that your best recruiting tool is the performance Josh Allen put on the field in the playoffs in the first 2 rounds this past season. Do you really need to sell anything else about this team to any prospective free agent when you got that guy?
Well, no. I mean, certainly it's a place where you know you're going to get a chance to go for a ring. No question about it. Josh Allen is a great advertisement for what's going on here in Buffalo. If you're on that side of the football, if you're an offensive player, no question you want to be a part of what's going on here. If you're a big guy, you're an offensive line, you got to think it may be hard to bust in on that group, but there's going to be some room for you. No question about it. Defensively for the Bills, I think it's a perfect landing spot, not only because they had a top-rated defense a year ago, but there's also a spot where if you're a guy like an older guy, an older veteran who's got some football left in him, and the way the Bills run their, like a pass rusher, and the Bills run their defensive line in such a way as you're not going to have to take 60 snaps a game for 17 weeks or 18 weeks in a row.
Yeah, you know you're going to make
You're
it through
going to
17
make it to the
games.
end of the season. You're going to get a chance to play the entire season. They're not going to wear you out with the way they run it. So it looks really enticing for me, for a veteran player, knowing you're not going to have the weight of the world on your shoulders trying to go every single snap, going in on first and second down, trying to stuff the run and then pass rush. They're going to pace you through the season. And with the staff they have here and the way they take care of their players and the recovery, during the week, preparation's not going to be a load either. They're going to help you get ready to play and help you get ready to practice. There's a lot to like here in Buffalo. Some of it has to do with Josh Allen, no question. Certainly on the surface, that's the first thing you see. But behind the scenes, this club does a lot to make it really attractive for players who've got a little bit of football left in them to come out and get their most.
I'm telling you right now, I mean, aside from Josh being a major selling point, and aside from if you're a defensive player saying, hey, you want to be part of the number 1 defense in football? Because that's what we were last year in this category, and 7 others. Let me know if you want to be a part of that. And we don't put a full burden on you if you're a defensive lineman. Our highest snap count guy got 57% of the snaps last
Right.
year. His name was Ed Oliver. Everybody else got less than that, less than 50%. So if you want to come in, you want to win, and you don't want to beat up your body doing it, come here. And oh, by the way, here's our injury report from Week 17. There's
Right.
one guy on it.
Right.
At the end of the year, there's one guy on it. We know how to take care of our people. If that's not convincing, I don't know what is.
Yeah, there's a
and
lot
I'm
to
not
like.
saying you're going to be able to get a bargain basement deal because of that, but you
you'll
may
get some interest.
You'll get some interest, and you may even convince people. I mean, look at all the guys that came back last year that didn't get top of the market money.
And
Matt
don't forget
Milano,
this.
Darrell Williams,
Right.
John Feliciano, they all came back at below market value because of what's going on here.
And don't forget this. It's not about giving them this outrageous. It's about them comparing what another team has to offer and what they're offering to what the Buffalo Bills are offering. And it's not apples to apples all the time. Sometimes it is apples to oranges. This team will give you a 3-year deal with a certain amount guaranteed, but the Bills will give you that guaranteed in the entire contract. If you get a 4-year deal with this guaranteed, the Bills will give you a 2-year deal worth the same money that you're guaranteed with the other team and a bigger chance of getting it with this 2-year deal and being successful of being on the field. So you might say, listen, I'll get the same money if I play the 2 years in Buffalo. I know I'm going to get it over here, but man, oh man, that situation over there, I'm going to go, I'm looking at a 3-13 or 3-14, a 5-12 year, couple of years.
Yeah.
When in Buffalo, it's a risk, no question. I'm not if I see the contract, I'll get the same money, but I got a chance to go for a ring. I got a chance to be in the playoffs and make playoff incentives. There's a comparison there that's not just cut and dried, and there's going to be some guys that will be enticed by a comparison of that nature. So it's not just about the deal itself, it's about what else is out there for that guy and what it looks like down the road.
Right. I think they'd be hard-pressed to find a better situation, though, than the one they could be walking into here in Buffalo for the myriad of reasons that we just listed. That'll do it for us here on Bills by the Numbers. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you know when our next episode is there for you. And remember, when you need to know about the Bills, you need to check Bills by the Numbers. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch up with you next week.